Welcome back to the channel Starseekers, my name's Luke, and in today's review we're going to be taking a look at a game called Moonshades. It's a first person dungeon crawler inspired by the classic D&D games, which sees you delving into forgotten tombs and dungeons as you embark on a quest to save the world of Harton from a demon invasion. Now, Moonshades was created by indie developer Victor Demonnier in his spare time, and after spending quite a few hours with the game, I have to say I'm pretty impressed with the amount of content and depth it has. It's been ported from mobile, so there are still remnants of this left over, but if you're a fan of old school dungeon crawlers, then it's definitely worth checking out. So let's dive into this review and take a look through some of what the game has to offer, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with my latest reviews and content. So in keeping with the style of the OG D&D games, Moonshades' story is a classic tale of a world in peril and of heroes rising up to save it from destruction. Demons have invaded the world of Harton through a mysterious portal, and all the townsfolk have fled to the safety of the mountains, but now two wanderers have arrived in the land to repel the demon horde and close the portal, and they call themselves Moonshades. Now, beyond the short introduction, I haven't really seen any other cutscenes to expand on the story, but there are still a few brave survivors out there in the world who offer snippets of dialogue, and you can also find the odd random note which adds a little more to the world's lore. In comparison to some D&D games I've played though, Moonshades still seems pretty light on the story side of things, which is a good thing if you just want to focus on the action, but could be a little disappointing if you're the type of person who loves those kind of deep fantasy elements in games. So if you've ever played any of the classic D&D dungeon crawlers, then you'll likely know what to expect from Moonshades when it comes to the basics, but the game expands on the original formula by introducing elements found in more modern RPG games. You begin by forming a party of two, selecting a character portrait and naming each of your characters before being dropped straight into the blacksmith's workshop, which acts as a kind of hub area, and here you can talk to the blacksmith, browse his wares, and take on a few quests before descending into your first dungeon. Now, the controls in the game take a little getting used to. Movement is handled by the D-pad with the right thumbstick allowing you to strafe, and all of the different menus are accessed by pushing the left thumbstick in a certain direction. Once inside these menus, you then generally use the ZL and ZR buttons to scroll between different windows, while the D-pad is used to move your cursor, but even after 6 hours of playing the game, I was still hitting the wrong buttons, so it's just something you're going to have to get used to. Now, as you get to adventuring in Moonglades, there isn't really much direction given on where to go or what to do. You'll find yourself exploring various dungeons, labyrinths and tombs, and the general objective is just to navigate through them, fighting enemies and collecting loot until you find a stairway leading to the next area. The layouts of each dungeon are completely different, and as you navigate your way through them, you'll come across deadly traps, solve various puzzles, and find secret areas hidden behind fake walls, and I thought there was some really good variety to the dungeons, with the enemies and loot you gain becoming more powerful the further into the game you get. You'll also meet a few different NPCs along the way who will offer the wares for sale to you or provide you with quests, and many of these quests are repeatable, rewarding you with things like XP or gold or items and equipment whenever you complete them. Now, when it comes to combat, you'll find plenty of monsters roaming about the dungeons who'll be all too happy to spill your blood, and you actually control both characters simultaneously, performing basic attacks using the ZR and ZL buttons, while skills are activated by first selecting a character with the LRR button before selecting the ability you want to trigger. As you gain experience from killing monsters and completing quests, your characters will level up, increasing the stats and granting them passive skill points, which can then be used to unlock new passive skills or new spells and abilities which deal damage to enemies or provide healing or buffs to your characters. But one thing that I wasn't too keen on was the fact that you first have to find skill tomes in order to learn new abilities before you can unlock them, and I found that this just really ended up limiting your character builds in the early game. So in addition to the general gameplay progression, Moonshades has a ton of different mechanics at play which really enhance your standard D&D formula by adding elements found in more modern RPGs. Firstly, in a similar vein to the Diablo games, the equipment that you find is either randomly generated or it's selected from a huge pool of possible items, and there are several different rarities, with rarer items providing bigger stat boosts. There's also a forge which allows you to create a ton of different items, though first you need to obtain the blueprints for them, and the forge can also be used to combine unwanted gear into equipment of a higher rarity, or enchant your items, granting additional boosts to your stats. Now, a short while into the game, you'll also unlock a place called the Pits, which offers a bunch of repeatable dungeons containing chests full of loot, and another area called the Wild Lure, which challenges you to fight your way through a gauntlet of rooms filled with enemies. After finding your way to the first town, you'll also find your own personal house which you can head inside and decorate, and there's also a tavern in the town where you can choose to gamble some of your precious gold on the roll of a dice. All in all, I think Moonshades has a lot to offer, and while its price point may seem a little high, coming in at around 15 quid on the Switch eShop, content wise I think you're definitely getting your money's worth with this one. Now, the one real criticism I have about the game is that its roots as a mobile game still show through in a lot of the game's systems. Many of the game's skill books and blueprints can be bought right away from the in-game shops instead of you having to find them through playing, but most of them are incredibly expensive, and this all points to you originally being able to purchase gems which could be spent to obtain large sums of gold, powerful equipment, or other useful items. While these don't impact too much on the overall enjoyability of the game and the gems can now be obtained in game, they do still have an impact on how the game plays, making it a little harder to obtain certain items. Overall though, Moonshades is still a great little RPG game, and if like me you're a fan of these old school first person adventure games, then I highly recommend checking it out. So visually then, instead of classic 2D sprite based graphics, the developer has opted for a more modern 3D approach, though the way in which the textures are used and the appearance of the enemies do give Moonshades a bit of a 90s feel. There's some good visual variety to the game's dungeons and towns, the artwork of the items is nice and all the menus look decent, but again, due to it being a mobile port, the user interface and the boxes that appear when you collect items are all pretty huge, and there's not actually a way to resize them. On the audio side of things, while the sound effects in Moonshades were all quite basic, I really liked how retro sounding they were, and there was some nice ambience to each of the game's areas. When it comes to music, while the soundtrack of Moonshades isn't bad, the music wasn't dynamic, and so it never changed to fit the situation that your characters were in. Normally I wouldn't have a problem with this, but having a heroic tune blasting out when you're just wandering through an empty creepy crypt just didn't really fit, and it got a little bit too much for me, so I decided to turn it off. So performance wise then, I can't say that I encountered any frame rate issues with the game on the Switch, and everything ran smoothly. In terms of issues, I've already mentioned about the mobile related remnants and the limitations with building your character in the early game, but other than this, there's very little that I can actually criticise about Moonshades. There are a couple of gameplay features, such as the house building and a kind of card game which you can play that require you to actually undock your Switch and play it in handheld mode, which wasn't really a big issue, but I could see it being a little bit annoying if you were just sat back on your sofa with your joypad and wanted to access these features. Other than this though, it's a pretty solid game, and when it comes to my own personal rating, I'm going to be giving Moonshades 4 out of 5 stars. If you're a fan of classic RPG games, then you'll no doubt find a lot to like in Moonshades. It's got some great gameplay mechanics and a decent amount of content to keep you occupied, but just be aware that its origins as a mobile game do still have a bit of a part to play in this one. And so that about does it for this review of Moonshades on the Nintendo Switch. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to hit that like button, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below, and if you watch my content regularly but have not yet subscribed, then please consider doing so as it really helps me out. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.